Hello, Alexandra. Alexander, how do you
How are
do?
you?
Alexander, welcome to the Voice of the Street. We have invited you to tell us, as a Russian expert, your views on the situation in Donbass and the situation in Crimea. Maybe you would like to first introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Alexander Chopov. I have a bachelor's in political science and international affairs from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And then after I graduated from there, I interned in U.S. Congress for a bit, so I have some experience there, know how that place works. And then I came back to Russia, and I have a PhD in political science here in Russia, and did some business, did some kind of unrelated things to politics. But when the Ukrainian crisis started, I started to realize that there are very few sources in the West that give the voice to the people of Donbass, especially, the people of Crimea, the people of Donbass. You have people like Graham Phillips who just film, and then they show what's going on, and then it's great. But if you don't have the background for it, then you won't really realize what's going on. Who are the bad guys? Who are the good guys? Why are these people fighting, and so on? And then you have channels like RT or something, and again, they report on current day events. So what I decided to do is go to Donbass, and we started a YouTube channel. It's called War in Ukraine, The Unreported Truth, or The Donbass Truth. There are two names. You can Google it or go on YouTube and find it.
We will look them up and we'll present it to the readers.
Thank you. And our goal is to show what is going on, to give the background, to explain to the people in the West why it started, and again to show that these people are not terrorists or separatists or rebels or whatever. They're not pro-Putin or pro-Russian. They're pro-don't bomb my children. They're pro-democracy, first of all.
If I remember correctly, the military operation that Porosjenko is now waging against the people in Donbass is actually called ATO, Anti-Terror Operation.
Yes, basically what happened was hundreds of thousands of people after Maidan said, you guys say that Maidan is for democracy, so let's actually have a real democracy in our country, because in Ukraine the governors of local regions are not elected, they're appointed from Kiev. And again, when people from eastern Ukraine came to power, they appointed governors in western Ukraine, which people there didn't like. And what the people in eastern Ukraine were afraid after Maidan, that they're going to get governors who are going to be very anti-Russian, and the majority of people in eastern Ukraine are Russian speakers. And they came out for federalization, so to have the country federalized, so they will have both local and federal kind of governments, and basically for democracy, for their basic rights to elect governors. None of them had guns, none of them had anything, and immediately it wasn't Poroshenko, it was Turchinov, who was the acting president at that time, who labeled all of these people, millions of people, terrorists, and started an anti-terrorist operation against an entire region, entire city. So basically, these millions of people, according to Ukrainian propaganda and even law, are terrorists now. Everyone from an infant to an elderly person.
I remember the first images of people standing on tanks, trying to stop them with stones and
with their bare hands, standing up to tanks.
With their hands. It was. They did not show it in the West. I must be honest. The censoring was very, very severe already at that time. To go to Crimea from here, I remember the elections, and I remember that they had a choice between two flags. One was a Nazi flag, and the other was a Russian flag. That was the perception of the people in Crimea. Then there was this referendum. The West was very upset because, hey, Crimea is a very important piece of land for the West, strategic, geopolitical, and I believe there's even oil and gas in the ocean. But after this election, a number of things happened, which in the minds of Russians justified their decision very much. Maybe you can elaborate on which events led to the fact that the Russians in Crimea have had enough.
Well, I just came back from Crimea a few days ago, and we're making a video about that. So hopefully we will have that ready before your program airs, and you can have a link to it. But basically, again, there's huge dissonance between what Ukraine says publicly. Again, with Maidan, we're for democracy, but then we kill people who are, want to elect their governors, and what Ukraine actually does to people. So Crimea, and this wasn't reported in the West at all, but even before Maidan won, even before the referendum, there was a group of Crimeans, several buses of Crimeans, who were in Kiev in support of Yanukovych. And they were coming back to Crimea, and they were stopped by hardcore radicals. They were taken out of their buses. They were beaten. Some of them were killed. And basically, at that point, people in Crimea realized that they're pretty much besieged because people on Maidan publicly said that they're like neo-Nazis, people with swastikas. Like, not much propaganda. They have swastikas on their shoulders.
Svoboda.
And they said publicly, we're going to send a, quote, friendship train to Crimea to teach those Crimeans how to love Ukraine. So here we go. Crimean police officers were just burned alive on Maidan. Crimean protesters, Crimean activists were ambushed and killed on a road between Kiev and Crimea. Mm-hmm. And here's these hardcore ultra-nationalists saying, we're going to come and teach you to love Ukraine. So at this point, people in Crimea were very apprehensive. People were really expecting to have a war on their hands to fight for their freedom. And basically, they started coming out themselves, and there were some clashes on the streets. And at that point, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, some of the soldiers came out, not to do anything, but just to stand behind the protesters who were exercising their basic rights.
That's Sevastopol, isn't it?
In Sevastopol and Simferopol, the two capitals, because Sevastopol is not part of Republic of Crimea. It's a separate political entity.
What many people don't know is that at the time, Russia had a military base there, because the West liked to portray as if the Russians invaded Crimea and took it over, but they forget to mention that they were there already. Yeah.
Well, it is true. The Russians did take over Crimea, but 2.5 centuries before this. So the Russians were present in Crimea since I think 1783. So unless you're talking about that invasion, then yes, Russians were present in Crimea, in Sevastopol and Simferopol. Legally, they were present there. So Russia didn't send any additional troops there. Russian servicemen came out to just to make sure that the local democratic processes that were going on in Crimea were not interrupted by these friendship trains from Kiev and radicals and other radicals. But after the referendum, which was overwhelming, and again, if you watch the reactions of Crimeans, you cannot fake this. People were crying in the streets, people were celebrating. This was like victory day for them.
It was censored in the West. We're not allowed to see it. Yeah.
Well, YouTube it and you will see.
I have seen them.
I mean, not you, but like reviewers.
People,
you cannot fake these emotions. And basically, what Ukraine did afterwards, while publicly in the West stating that they want to liberate Crimea, that they worry about the Crimean people, they started committing what can probably be considered war crimes against Crimeans. The first act of the democratic government that wants to liberate Crimea was to cut off Crimean water. So there's a North Crimean canal that brings water into Crimea that was built by the Soviet Union before Ukraine became a state. And basically the first thing that Ukrainians did was to shut that off. So Crimea is a pretty arid region, so without that water, it's very hard to have agriculture there.
Before the bloody coup, I was in Crimea actually, and one of the problems they had was water. So they were already having a water problem, partly due to mismanagement by many Ukrainian governments. So cutting off a key water supply endangered the lives of many civilians. That is a reasonable conclusion.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go as far to say, politically and, symbolically, depriving people of water is a war crime. But again, like, people weren't exactly dying of thirst, but, they couldn't raise their crops, they couldn't water their fields. So it wasn't a situation where, they were literally, dying in the streets, but it was a war crime because, the most basic human right is the right to water.
Yeah.
And then when Crimeans didn't bow down and didn't come crying back to Ukraine, after cutting off their water, Ukraine decided to cut off their food, which again is the second most basic human right, water and food. in September 2015, paramilitaries, Ukrainian pro-government paramilitaries, organized a blockade, stopping all the trucks going into Crimea because they wanted to starve the occupiers. And again, this, as with most things that Maidan did, it backfired because, yes, the prices in Crimea went up by about 10% because of logistics to bring it around through mainland Russia. But the biggest losers of this were people in South Ukraine, people in Kherson and Nikolaev, whose harvests, 90% of whose harvests for decades went to Crimea. Mm-hmm. So a lot of farmers, like hundreds of farmers in Kherson, hundreds of farmers in Nikolaev, went bankrupt. So their own government, while trying to starve Crimeans, actually, destroyed the livelihoods of thousands of people in Ukraine. And after that, after trying to drive Crimeans thirsty, and after trying to starve Crimeans, Ukraine, with all its infinite love for Crimea, decided to deprive them of the third most basic human right, heat and light. So Ukrainian, again, pro-government paramilitaries with Ukrainian flags on them blew up power lines going into Crimea last November, plunging the peninsula into darkness without heat at the beginning of winter. Yeah. And thank God I was just there. The winter now is very horrible. It's very cold. There's a lot of snow. But last winter was very, very mild, and people didn't freeze to death. If it was colder, people would have frozen to death. And speaking to a lot of Crimeans, you understand that, that was the last straw. Even people who were somehow pro-Ukrainian, when they were in the dark and when Ukrainians were celebrating, again, like this wasn't like something that wasn't coordinated. I mean, they were on TV on main Ukrainian channels bragging about how they left those Ruskies, in the dark, laughing about it, saying that they're going to crawl back to us now. And that was, the last straw pretty much for many, many people. They celebrated, I was there when I was a year, and they celebrated as their independence, final independence from Ukraine Day, when in the minds of people that everything just clicked completely. These people are not helping us. These people want us to die.
There was another event which made a lot of impression on me, a great impression. Was not in the Western media, surprise, surprise. And that was the massacre in Odessa on I believe, the 2nd of May, 2014.
That was, I personally, again, you did not see this in the West, but when I turned on the TV, I cried because watching, people jumping out of the, I have goosebumps talking about it now because watching people jumping out of windows to their death, watching people crawl out, burnt and being kicked by pro-Ukrainian patriots who are screaming at them, Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine. I mean, again, you can YouTube these things. It's a burning building. People are jumping off. People are dying, and they're shouting, Ukraina, Ukraina. And they celebrated this. They were laughing about May Day barbecue. They called it. They burnt 50 insects.
Colorado.
Colorado, because of the ribbon. And again, that was one of the things. When Crimeans look at the love that Russian speakers get, and in Donbass and Odessa, they are completely certain that their actions were justified. And again, some of the things, in the Netherlands right now, there's a collection of Crimean gold, so-called Scythian gold, is in the Netherlands right now. And again, there's going to be a hearing on the 14th, not a hearing, the decision will be made by the Dutch court on the 14th of December. Okay. So basically what happened was 4 Crimean museums and one museum from Kiev organized this incredible collection of ancient artifacts from Crimea, because Crimea has been part of Greece. There were Roman colonies there, Venetian, everyone who you've ever heard of, and many countries many tribes you have never heard of, lived in Crimea. So it's a melting pot of so many civilizations that it's a very special place, not just for Russia or Ukraine or Europe. It's a very special cultural place for the world. And the Crimean museums organized this collection of the best pieces of Scythian gold. So the Scythians were these nomadic people who were ruled over most of Eurasia, all the way to China, to Crimea, and they were very good goldsmiths. So Crimea, the Crimean museums, with the collections that belong to the museums, organized a collection in the Allard Pearson Museum in the Netherlands. And they sent it there in February of 2014, and then all the things we talked about happened. So,
if I understand right, but correct me if I'm wrong, if I understand right, the museum itself took it upon them to decide that they could not give it back to the rightful owner, and that a judge had to decide. To me that sounds ludicrous, that the museum makes political decisions, so-called without a government nod, and that this has led to the situation that basically Holland is sitting on other people's property for a very long time.
Well, yes. What happened was the agreements were signed between the museum. So, like, there's 4 Crimean museums and the Alan Pearson Museum. So the gold is the property of the museums, and not just the property of the museums. It's a property of Crimean people. You know, again, these collections, they were all found in Crimea. And you know, this reminds me what Kiev is doing now. It's part of what we talked about.
It's
you know,
very cynical. I'll tell you why. In Holland, we have a lot of publicity about Ukraine that stole paintings from Holland. Yeah.
Well, and the Ukrainians now, the Ukrainian politicians who go on TV and say, if those Dutch send the gold back to Crimea, we will keep their paintings here. You know, it's a good old-fashioned democratic hostage-taking situation.
And our government is very sensitive to Ukrainian blackmail. Yeah, we had a referendum and they does shit on it. Yeah, in Holland it's called the no is yes referendum. Yeah?
In our latest video that I hope we'll have by next week, we're going to show, you know, again, the same people who before the referendum were, you know, saying, oh, we love the Netherlands, they're these democratic, wonderful people. The next day we're calling, you know, derogatory terms, you know, those gay druggies, you know, and just completely insulting and like crapping all over. I mean, it's very cynical. It's very cultural imperialism, because it's like, you know, the British who plundered Egypt and all the Egyptian treasures stored in London that have nothing to do with London. This gold has absolutely like 0.000 historical ties to Kiev. It's Crimean, and again, it's part of a collection. So the museums broke up the collection to show it to the Dutch people. It went to Germany first, and then to the Netherlands. Again, you know, since these are amazing treasures, not of Crimea or Russia or Ukraine, they're treasures of, you know, the world heritage. And if they're held, if they're sent back to Kiev, these museums, Crimean museums, will never show their gold ever again in the world. So this will deprive, you know, the people of Western Europe and other places of seeing these wonderful relics of the past.
I go a step further. When it goes to Ukraine, it probably lands up in the collection of some oligarch. Yeah, gone forever. That's Ukraine.
Well, I mean, last week again, you didn't see this.
I have to wrap it up a bit due to time. After the documentary has been, and I believe, is the documentary only about the gold or also about other topics?
It's pretty much what we covered today. It shows the reality between what Ukraine says and does, and again, it then focuses on the gold. We actually did, could be very interesting to the Dutch people. We did a big documentary from Donbass on the MH17 disaster and on the JIT report. That is already on our channel. Hopefully, you can do a link to that. Maybe this time we can talk about that.
We'll make a link to that one after the documentary has been, so that will be next Thursday, the Monday after. I hope that you will come on our show again. We will discuss it, and I have many more questions about what is going on and where are we going to, because that is also a topic. Where are we going to from here? Yeah. Don't throw your hands in the air.
I mean, where we're going with the elections in the U.S. and everything, I hope we're going someplace good, but I hope and pray we're going someplace good, and maybe, you know, rationality will finally kick in. So hopefully, yeah, let's discuss that next time. Thank you for inviting me. It was great talking.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Have a good